Welcome to Leaving Nothing to Chance, your go-to podcast where we bring you insights from some of the most influential voices in small business and personal development. Each week, we dive deep into conversations with top thought leaders, authors, and business moguls from around the world, sharing their secrets to success and strategies for growth. Tune in for exclusive content that will inspire, motivate, and equip you to take your journey to the next level. This is Leaving Nothing to Chance.
Well, Dennis, how are you today?
Just great, John. Thanks for having me.
I read this Disney chapter originally in November or December, and then I went back and I reread it, and there's a lot I didn't know, and a lot I didn't pick up the first time, so I actually went and made about 18 or 19 different questions. So here's what I'm thinking. Let's go about 45 or 50 minutes. And then if we're not through it, we'll have a part two.
That's wonderful.
Through it, then we're through it. But so we'll see how far we get, because I don't want to rush through it because there's too much content. And everybody's loving Ink and Insight. That's the great news. We want to give them a lot of content. So anyway, so let's get rolling here. So first thing, I never knew, and I've been to Disney in Florida, I've been to Disney in California, I've even been to Disney in Paris a number of years ago, but I didn't realize that Main Street was patterned after Marceline, Missouri. I hope I'm saying that right. And for the people in Marceline, if I'm not saying it, I apologize. I think I'm saying it correctly, which Walt actually lived in for a brief time.
Yes, that was his favorite place. His happiest time of his life. He loved Marceline.
And as a young boy, he met Buffalo Bill Cody, and that had a big impact on him.
It did. Yeah, Buffalo Bill was traveling the United States and doing his Wild West show, and he'd always have a big parade. So when he came to Marceline, they were starting the parade, and he saw this young boy standing on the sideline, just and very excited. So he reached down and he said, "Come and ride with me. Come and sit by me on the parade." And he reached down and he pulled Walt up and set him beside him. And that just really made an impact on him. He said he was really impressed with that.
And I found it interesting that as a child, he did a little bit of acting, and he flew for the first time in Peter Pan.
Yes. Yeah. When he was in elementary school, he was cast as Peter Pan. And when it was time for him to fly, his big brother hoisted the rope, which was just what foreshadowing of things to come. That was just so amazing that it turned out that way. Because without Roy, there wouldn't have been a Walt.
Yeah. I had heard that before, but when I read this chapter again, very clearly, somebody has to be, I don't want to say the adult in the room, but when it comes to the business side of these creative people, there better be an adult in the room, because they easily get taken advantage of otherwise by people less creative but more financially driven. And I think Roy probably saved the day a few times.
He did. Even with Roy helping him, he got taken advantage of quite often. That's one of the fun parts of the story.
The funny part too is you can almost, and you did such a great job writing this chapter, by the way, you could almost put yourself in Walt's position as this young kid, whether it was the Main Street or whether it was Peter Pan or it was some of these other things that he witnessed, Buffalo Bill, for example, and all these things that later he manifested those ideas at Disney for all of our benefit, for all of us and our kids and our grandkids and everyone else that's enjoyed those theme parks through the years. And of course, the movies we'll get to as well.
I agree. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about vaudeville, because you and I are old enough to not remember vaudeville. We're not that old, thank God, but our parents certainly remembered it, and our grandparents talked about it. But for a lot of our listeners that are probably under 50, tell them a little bit about vaudeville, and once again, how maybe some of that creativity from vaudeville rubbed off on Walt.
In the 20s and parts of the 30s, vaudeville was the big thing. That's what everyone did on the weekends. They went, and the vaudeville would last all day. So some people would take a ticket and go in and witness the shows all day. They had everything, singers, dancers, comedians and jugglers. It was a big deal. But Walt loved the comedians, and he would go and he would listen to them over, and he would memorize what they said. And then when he got back to school, he would say the same thing, and he would get the laughs. He practiced it with the punchlines, and he was good at the timing, and so he became popular around school because of the jokes that he told that he heard at vaudeville's.
And so many great people came out of it. Jimmy Durante, I remember as a kid, and
The Andrews sisters.
Andrew's sisters, and the Little Rascals. Who was I'm trying to think the leader of the Little Rascals. What was his name?
Spanky or Alfalfa?
There was Spanky and who played Spanky? What was that actor's name?
I don't remember. He was from here, from this area here.
They all did though. All of those actors came out of that period of vaudeville, you know. But it was a great time in America. I remember my parents witnessed a little bit of it. They were, you know, just young enough to experience a little tiny bit of it. Here's a business lesson though, because when we think of Disney to this day, it's an iconic brand. There's no argument there. And I think there's some things Disney's done recently that Walt wouldn't approve of, but he's not here to see it. But he built an iconic brand, a worldwide iconic brand. And one of the things I picked up here is that as a youngster, he started to invest his own money in courses for self-learning.
Yes. And he spent time in the libraries. He went and checked out every book on animation that was available and just pored over it until he understood it. The reason I put this story in the book was one weekend I was watching TV, and you know how you'll skip through TV shows. And I saw this, it was a kind of it wasn't a movie, but it was a documentary. And it was talking about when Disney was young, and it showed that he had this bustling business. People were in and out, they were making, everything was great. This was back in Kansas City. And then something happened, and I wasn't sure what it was because I was only half watching it. And then everyone was gone, and he was sitting there alone in his business. And I thought, that's so interesting. So I looked for it and looked for it. I tried to find it on YouTube. I tried to find it any place that I could, and I never could. And I thought, I bet other people would be interested in this story because it was really an interesting story. So that's when I started doing the research. I spent more time on Disney, on this story here, than all of the other stories in the book. It's the longest story anyway. But the research was hard because it wasn't, everything else was easy to find. Pretty much all the other stories were, you just Google or look on YouTube, search for a few minutes, you find either a book or whatever you needed. But there were things about Disney that I would hear and you couldn't find them anywhere. So I had to search and search, and now they're all in one place. I know they just did a TV special about the businesses that made America or something, and they covered Disney, and I watched it, and I just laughed. I thought, they didn't even touch what I did. It's not even close because they left out so much powerful stuff. If nothing else, get the book and read Disney because it's just really interesting, super interesting story.
It's so compelling because we think we know somebody like Disney, right? Because we certainly know the brand, right? We certainly know some of the characters, if not all of them, right? It's hard to remember all of them. As I was reading through, I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot about Porky Pig. I didn't forget about Porky Pig, but I forgot about Porky Pig. But I want to stay on this for a minute because there's something for everybody to hear here, and that is once again. We say all the time, all leaders are readers, all readers are leaders, right? That's this. You and I are the first people who said that, and Jim Rohn probably wasn't, and who knows? Maybe Abe Lincoln was the first guy that fit that bill, and maybe General Grant said that about him afterwards or something. I don't know, but it's such a point that he was so dedicated to his learning about once again what he was interested in. Okay, I don't know if there was something he wasn't interested in, maybe he could care less. But when he found his passion,
right.
Which is so important for any entrepreneur. When you find your passion, you go and you don't look at the clock. You don't worry about it. You pour yourself into it. I think if somebody else comes to mind when we talk about a guy who was online, not online courses, wasn't online, but buying courses that were shipped to the home in those days. I think of Ben Carson, Dr. Carson, same thing. They couldn't put a book out that he wouldn't pick up and read cover to cover.
Exactly.
And there's been others, certainly a lot of other people throughout history, but it just illustrates a point again. Here's a guy built this iconic brand that's lived long after he's gone and will live long after we're all gone.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, he did it because he was a constant guy about education and what he was interested in, and thus the results that he had.
He learned at such a young age. When he was while he was still living in Marceline, he moved from there when I think he was 7. And so he already knew he wanted to draw. He had already started drawing and he was selling his pictures to neighbors. So he started very young.
It's funny because he worked for a company called Pestman Rubin.
Yes.
And I don't know whatever happened to them, but they told Walt that he had a lack of creativity.
Yeah, they fired him because he didn't have the creativity. I thought that was funny. I wondered if anybody would catch that. That's humorous.
I got to laugh. I think a lack of creativity. I think Einstein was told too he didn't have an acumen for numbers by some professor at one point. So much sometimes. We all make mistakes. Talk about the laughogram a little bit, because that's where Alice in Wonderland came from, I think.
The laughogram was when he was doing shorts. He and his friend 𝐕𝐈𝐒 started doing commercials for local theaters. They would do little animated videos for local theaters. And they were not making any money. They were losing. He didn't charge enough. By the time he was paid, everything that he did cost him more than what he was being paid. So that was not working. But then someone else saw what he was doing, some company out of Tennessee, and said, we want you to do 6 animated cartoons for us, and we'll give you $100 down and $11,000 when you finish. Because of that, he was able to go out and sell stock in his company, and the company you just mentioned, Laughogram. And so, oh man, he was living it up. He had all that stock money and the $11,000 coming in. And well, back in the teens, the 19 teens, $11,000 was like $1 million now. It was a lot of money. He was going to Electric Park, and having dates, and doing everything. And then the company went bankrupt and didn't pay him. And he only got the $100. And so he had hired all of these cartoonists and trained them. He had hired the art students, the local art students, and trained them to become animators because he was the only one that knew how. So he trained them all to do it. And when they found out that the money was not coming, just one by one, they left because they were not going to be paid. They all wanted to stay. What was amazing is the guys that came out of that little business, that little laughogram business, formed all of the cartoons we watched as kids, Looney Tunes. Every single one of them was in that Kansas City group. And I'll let you read the book to see who was who, but it was a who's who of cartoonists of the future. When it finally went under, he had put his shoes in the shoe shop and didn't have the money to get them out. So he had moved out of his apartment because he couldn't pay the rent, and he was living in the studio. Of course, he couldn't pay the rent there either. Eventually, he was going to have to leave, and he didn't have any shoes. He was still working. He even got a couple of other little jobs, but he was still working in this little mouse. At first, when he first saw it, it scared him. The little mouse came up. And he saw the mouse, and the mouse saw him. The mouse ran away, and he jumped back. The next day, he was working, and the mouse came back. This time, he didn't jump. He just talked to him, and he did the same way that he did with the farm animals. He gave him human capabilities or whatever. I don't know. He would talk to him, and he would hear the mouse talking back to him. It was just imagination. And right before he left, because everything was falling apart, he just poured his heart out to the mouse. The mouse just listened to him, and you could hear it saying, "Oh, wow, gee, oh, that's really bad." And then he left, and he left the mouse. The mouse had told him that his name was Mortimer. He remembered Mortimer Mouse, and later on in the story, Mortimer comes back. But did you want to say anything else about the Laughing Grounds?
No, it's funny because my next note was on Mortimer and the bean can. That I guess he was so broke he was eating canned beans every night.
All he had was water and beans, and he would leave a bean or two out for Mortimer so that he would come back. And Mortimer appreciated that, and they became good friends.
And Mortimer eventually became?
Further on in the story, he had gone to Hollywood, and he and his brother started the first cartoon business, and things were going pretty well. They developed Oswald the Rabbit, and his business partner wasn't really a partner. It was the people that had hired him, ripped him off. They stole Oswald the Rabbit and all the other characters. He didn't have any characters. And then they went and hired all of his cartoonists. He was totally devastated. He had no income, no characters, nothing. And he had to go back. He was in New York when he found all this out. So he got back in the train with his wife, and they were headed back. And he thought, man, what am I going to tell Roy? What am I going to tell? What are we going to do? And he loved trains. And so he was just laying back and listening, and he had a pad, like you had a pad, and he was drawing characters, trying to come up with, he drew a pig and a cat and a fox. He drew everything he could think of. And he finally the train was running, and you know how a train will cut. And so he just got in with the rhythm, and he fell asleep. And the next thing he knew, he was back in his studio in St. Louis, or Kansas City, with Mortimer. He remembered pouring his heart out, and he said, Mortimer, here I am again. And I'm right back where I started from. And then the train jolted, and it woke him up, and it hit him, bam. And his wife looked at him, and she saw he was smiling. And she said, what's going on? He said, I have my new character. She said, well, what is it? He said, it's a mouse, Mortimer the mouse. His wife said, honey, I like the idea of the mouse, but could you name it something a little bit more lighthearted, say like Mickey? He said, yeah, Mickey Mouse. And so Mickey Mouse was born. Now, I put a little postscript there that said, you can't find this written down anywhere. The only place you're going to find it written down is where I just wrote it, because it's based on all of the things that I read. Everything that I know about it says that's how it happened. When he got off the train, he had the Mickey, and later on they said his wife talked him into it, that she didn't like Mortimer. But anyway, it's the birth of Mickey Mouse. That's one of the fun parts of the stories. But we also skipped over Electric Park.
Oh, I got that in there.
Oh, you got it in there. So that's one of my favorite parts of the story. Go ahead.
Yeah, so let's stay on Mickey Mouse for a minute, because 1931, 100 years almost ago, he had 1 million members in the Mickey Mouse Club.
That's true. But it wasn't the same Mickey Mouse Club that you and I watched when we were children. It was just movies. The first movie theater took it up, and kids would all come and they'd show a Mickey Mouse cartoon, and they'd get little gifts and stuff. And so another theater picked it up, and another one. And before long, they had 1 million members all over the United States, because every movie theater wanted to have a Mickey Mouse Club because it brought in all of the kids in the area. And so he kept it for a while, but then it got to be more trouble for him than it was worth. The movie theaters didn't want to get rid of it, because for them, it was really great. But he let it go for various reasons. He had other things he wanted to devote his time to.
In the Three Little Pigs, I found this interesting. When I was a little kid, of course, I didn't understand this the first time you see the Three Little Pigs, but that the big bad wolf was symbolic of the Great Depression.
The little song they sang, "Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf," it became the national anthem against the Depression. And everybody sang it and helped them get through that hard time.
And Snow White was a story his grandmother told him.
Yes. When he was a little boy, his grandmother read him stories out of a storybook. And the list of the stories she read him is actually in the book. And Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was one of them. He wanted to do a full-length cartoon, but everybody told him he was crazy. All the critics said, that's crazy. It's going to hurt people's eyes to look at all that color. Women are not going to sit in the theater and watch a mouse for 2 hours. It just won't work. But he was determined. He was determined to do it anyway. So he went to the library and he read all of the stories of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Some of them were morbid. If you go back and read them, so he read them all and then he wrote his own. And he came to his studio one day and he had everybody come into an auditorium in the studio. And he told them, we're going to change cinema history. And here's how we're going to do it. And he told them the entire story and he played every part himself. He played the wolf, he played the woodsman, he played Snow White. He would show them how it was going to be scary and how they were going to be running and how the little pigs were going to be. And when he finished, everybody in the studio believed it was going to work. It didn't matter what Hollywood thought, but the studio knew when he finished that meeting, we're going to do this and it's going to change cinema history. They believed in him, which is why it worked.
How about Donald Duck's development?
Donald, it's not really covered a lot in the book. All of the characters just came on. Mickey is the main character. It didn't even go into Minnie very much, but the characters came on. The only one it really covers is Goofy, and the only reason is Walt didn't like Goofy. He didn't want that character. He didn't get along with the animator that did the character. They kept it secret. In fact, I was a little hesitant to put it in the book because I don't know that Disney wants the word out. Even now, that was the case, but it was true. But he liked all his other characters, and he even championed a couple of others that fell by the wayside. So if you go back and listen to some of his interviews, he's talking about, there was one that was a chicken and one that was a donkey, and he was talking about how great they were going to be. They just fell by the wayside. They didn't become great, but Mickey and Donald were always successful.
Mickey's the guy, still the guy.
Yeah, and he always gave Mickey the credit. That one part in the book, I said, he always said that, remember, all of this happened because of a mouse. And then I said, but I wonder which mouse he's talking about.
Mortimer, Mickey.
May have been Mortimer. And when he did those shorts back in Kansas City, or St. Louis, no, it was Kansas City. When he did those shorts, Mickey showed up in one of them. There was a little snake where a mouse came out, and it was Mickey. You could tell it was Mickey Mouse, but back then there wasn't a Mickey Mouse. So Mickey actually appeared in a movie 10, 15 years before he was even created.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. I'm thinking about different times that I've done events in Florida and where we used anything from Disney, and the fact that you never see the same character, two of the same character, so that the kids always think Mickey's really Mickey or Donald's Donald or Goofy's Goofy. It's just incredible how orchestrated and run that place is, that you, even by accident, you won't see two Mickeys having lunch together.
You probably don't realize it when you're there in Florida, but there's an entire underground. The entire Walt Disney World is underground too. So that's why everybody knows where everybody else is. And if there's two Mickeys in one place, one of them goes underground.
I didn't know that. Okay.
So there's a total tunnel system with everything. There's restaurants and dressing rooms, and everything is underneath.
Incredible. Let's talk a little bit about, let's talk about Electric Avenue.
Electric Park.
Electric Park. I call it Electric Avenue. I don't know why.
When he moved to Kansas City, he was really upset because Santa, he loved the farm. He and his brother and his sister, they were just heartbroken because the farm was wonderful. And then here they were moving to this big city where they didn't know anybody. And he walked out and he saw, he only lived about less than a mile away from Electric Park, and he saw these lights. There wasn't anything like that back then. Electric light, people didn't even have electric lights in their home. He started to explore, and he got down there and he saw, my God, what is that? There's these strands of lights going up into the air. Some of the poles were 40, 50, 60 foot, 25 foot high, and they had fireworks. Of course, he couldn't get in because it was fenced in and you had to have a ticket to get in, but he could see from the outside. And when he saw that, it just burned an impression in his brain. At the end of every night, they had rockets and cannon, all kind of, what are those? I can't think of the fireworks where they, Roman candles. Okay. Roman. This is in the Midwest. There wasn't any towns, no big towns for thousands of miles away. So the sky was black except for the stars. And then here's all these strands going up. And when he saw it, he thought, this looks like the castles that my grandmother used to read to me about. Now, when you think of Disney, what do you think of? Oh,
I'm here. Hold on 1 second. I think I need to change your battery, Dennis. Let's pause 1 second here.
Okay.
We had a little technical difficulty there for a second, folks, but apologize. So we're back. So we were talking a little bit about the electric park and how that kind of evolved from.
Right. So when you think of Disney, if you turn on to Disney on Sunday night and see Tinkerbell moving around, what do you see?
Dark background with electric lights.
Yeah, you see a castle.
Yeah.
And when you see Walt Disney World, you see a castle. Oh. So that's exactly what he saw when he saw Electric Park. All those plumes of lights going up and the fireworks is very similar to what we see now when we think of the wonderful world of Disney or Disney. I just thought that was just amazing that he carried it with him all those years and then made it a reality. The stories his grandmother would tell him when he was just a child, 2, 3 years old, that he remembered those mystical castles that he drew pictures of when he was in school and bored. He drew pictures of those castles, and then he saw Electric Park, and then it just all came together. And now we see it all the time. That's what we think of when we think of Disney.
It's funny because he was so clever in taking his life experiences and putting them into his art. And I'll give you an example that I experienced. It's not in the book, but just as a side note, I was over in Munich about 3 years ago on a company-sponsored trip with about 30 other people. And they took us up to this castle. I can't tell you the name of the castle offhand, but it's the castle that he basically created for, I want to say, the Magic Castle that he copied that for, I want to say, and it is almost exact. But it's a small castle. It's not very big. The one that he built is much bigger, frankly. But what's funny is when you get the backstory of who lived here and who built this thing. It was a single guy, never married. Apparently a very good-looking man that all of the local women wanted to be married to, but for whatever reasons he chose not to marry. He had his life, and he was a prince. So then you think of Prince Charming. It's okay. So he used the metaphor of that guy to make him Prince Charming, because I'm sure the women in town thought he was quite charming. And then, of course, the castle itself. And it was one of those days, too, that it was very overcast. It was early May. It's still pretty cold over there then. And we're climbing up to go to this thing. And you're literally climbing in the clouds. You have a cloud cover that you're walking through to get up to this place. It was just a beautiful experience. But anyway, they made a big deal. Like, they had all the pictures of Disney, Florida, with like, this is our castle you guys have over there that Disney kind of copied. They're quite proud of it, as they should be. It's quite beautiful. But anyway, let's come back to a couple of other things here. Disneyland itself is modeled after Tivoli Gardens over in Denmark, which I did not know till I read your book. I never knew that.
Disney traveled to every amusement park and everything he could find anywhere in the world. And he took Art Linkletter with him to Tivoli Park. And Linkletter took notes of what Disney was doing and reported on it. And that's where I got my part of the book, from Art Linkletter. And he would question them about everything. That park was gorgeous. Everything was kept immaculate. And Disney said, this is it. They even had measured, if you purchased something to eat or a soft drink, they knew exactly how many steps you would take before it was time to put it in a trash can, and then have a trash can there. That's how well this was put together. And so he met the people that operated it, interviewed them, took notes, and visited it more than once. He went quite often and shared with them what he was trying to do and got ideas from them. He was serious about having something that was really clean and nice and beautiful.
How would you have liked to have been a fly on the wall between Disney and Art Linkletter in that conversation?
Oh, wouldn't that be great? That's two amazing people.
Oh, yeah. Side note on that, the fellow that I've worked with for years from California, he and his wife been members of the Dr. Norman Vincent Peale Foundation for many years. So they were invited to a dinner out in the Bay Area somewhere, and Art was still alive, and they got a chance to meet Art. Art was probably, I think he was in his early 90s, but still entrepreneurial, million ideas. He's doing this, he's doing that, he's flying all over the place. Just a remarkable human being. Because for some of our younger listeners, you may not know who Art Linkletter was, but he was also just that 40s, 50s, 60s, and even 70s entrepreneur, created so many things, including, what was the show we had for kids? Kids Say the Darndest Thing, was that? Yeah, I thought so. Okay. Because a little bit before my time, my older sister used to watch that show all the time when she was young.
He had an Art Linkletter's house party, and then at the end, he would interview the kids, and that was a section of Art Linkletter's house party. It came on every day, and every housewife in America watched it. They saw him 5 days a week throughout the entire year, and I saw him quite often myself, which was in the 50s, mid 50s to mid 60s. He was very popular.
So let's talk about some business things with Walt, because when you say Walt Disney, so iconic, so many ways, but it wasn't an easy journey in his life.
No, he had the big failure in Kansas City, where the people didn't pay him. They went bankrupt, and he lost all of the money. He did keep a little bit of the money that had been invested, and he got another job. Instead of paying his investors back, he made one film, or a piece of a film. And that's really why, if he hadn't have done that, we wouldn't know Disney today. He took it with him to Hollywood, and then he shopped it to New York distributors. And back then, there were only 5 or 6 New York distributors. So he would send it and then send it back. He'd send it. And one of them sent him a telegram and offered him a really great deal. Roy was in the hospital dying. He had tuberculosis, and he was really in bad shape. So he took that telegram and he went to Roy and showed it to him and said, "Look at this. I can do this, but I can't run the business." He said, I can make this happen, but I don't know what to do. And he handed it to Roy, and Roy read it. And he got up out of his deathbed and put on his pants. And they left and opened the studio the next day. Roy never had another symptom, and he outlived Walt by 10 years.
I was going to ask you that, Roy's influence, because throughout what you wrote, Roy's influence is huge. And without Roy, I'm not sure we ever would have known who Walt really was.
You couldn't have, because Roy got the money. He was the money man, and Disney would squander it. He didn't mean to, but he just wanted everything to be the way he wanted it to be, and he didn't care how much it cost. And so Roy was stuck with, and luckily Roy didn't care about the spotlight. He didn't want to be in the spotlight. he wanted his brother, you're the thinker, you be in the spotlight. But boy, he kept him in a really tight position all the time. Whereas he is always having to run out and find more and more money. And as quick as he got it, he'd spend it, Walt would spend it. He'd have to go out and get some more. And it just came this close, where just this one little thing happened and they got by. But that's what makes the story so interesting. It's just amazing. And how many people took advantage of him, because he would lose everything and start over and expect Roy to go get the money and make it work. And he would.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, it's funny because you read Ray Kroc's story, and his partner, now I'm going to forget his name, but he was a real estate guy. And he was the guy in the McDonald's kingdom that said, hey, you want to lease these property, you want to own the property, lease it to the people with the restaurants on them for 99 years. They made more money in real estate than they ever made flipping hamburgers, at least when they were alive. Maybe now it's different. But yeah, there's always that 1-2 punch. And the second guy, we never know, like even here, can you think of that guy's name? Because I can't,
But did you know that Ray Kroc was also in the ambulance corps at the same time that Walt Disney was?
That's why I brought it up. I found that fact on Google, believe it or not.
Okay.
You imagine, wow. Talk about entrepreneurs, right?
So Kroc came to Walt after Disneyland and he wanted him to sell his McDonald's stuff, but he wanted to have all the control, and Walt just said, I don't think so.
Walt was pretty big at that point already. But yeah, like I say, he lost everything in 1940. He literally lost everything, including all the characters, Pinocchio and Fantasia, Dumbo, Bambi, all of those characters. Basically, I think he lost the rights to them temporarily, didn't he?
No, the characters that he lost was Oswald, and all of the characters that were with Oswald. And this was back in the 20s, or early 20s, or late, like 1919, 20 or something like that. That's when he lost his characters. He almost lost his studio and everything else when he ran out of money. The Bank of America had just pretty much decided they're not making enough money. They owe us millions and millions of dollars. This was right after the war, and most of the people on the board were ready to just pull the plug. And if that had happened, that'd been the end of it. Yeah. But there was one person, the vice president, got up in front of everybody and said, look, I've been following these people really closely. They just need time to recruit. We're never going to get our money back if we don't stick with them. And he talked them into it, talked them into funding him. Wow. And then right before the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was a big fiasco, because to get the funding for it, he had to promise to have it by Christmas the following year. He'd already been working on it for 7 years, and it wasn't even 20% finished when he made and it just came up to the deadline. The bank said, we need to see what you've got. And Royce told Walt, they want to see what you got. He said, no, impossible. I'm not going to show them. We can't do it. It would just be some drawings and some color and some. And so Roy said, okay, you're either going to show them or they're going to pull the plug and it's over. So they made a screen. And so the vice president came in to the screening, and Walt talked for 2 hours. He just talked him through it. Some of it was just drawings, some of it moving drawings, some of it was the color film. And after it was over, the vice president of Bank of America never said a word. They just looked. He didn't laugh. He just looked at him. So they got up and went outside, and Roy was Walt was just scared to death. So when they got outside, the vice president said, talking about the weather, I was talking about everything but the movie. And then he got in his car and cranked the car up. And Disney was going, what? And he rolled the window down and he said, you guys are going to make a pile of money on that movie. And he drove off. And that's another close call, because he could have said, no, we're not going to give you any more money on it. But they were still working on the movie the day before the screening. You're talking about running it to the edge. But his goal was to get people to cry. He thought, if I can get people to cry watching a cartoon that's just a drawing on a screen, I will have accomplished something. And so he invited all of his artists, all the people that had worked on the movie, and all of Hollywood was there. And they had spotlights. They had everybody, all the stars came. Every star in Hollywood came. And they had an orchestra. He had an orchestra outside playing the music, a live orchestra. And so if it worked, he already had all the toys ready to go out the next day. And as the movie progressed and it got to the part where Snow White was dead and laying in the glass coffin, and the little seven dwarfs were crying, the people that drew it were looking around them, and there's people pulling out their handkerchiefs and sniffling, and tears were running down their eyes, and they knew right then, oh, we've done it, we've done it. And the next day, he made $7 million. That was his profit. After everything else, he made $7 million. So he used that to buy a new studio. He spent all of his money on a new studio, and poor old Roy had to start all over again. That's when he decided he wanted to do Disney World.
What's amazing about that is I remember being a little kid and going to see Bambi.
Yeah.
Same thing. I'm thinking right now, my emotions watching that. Now, yeah, I was a child. He was able to move people to tears, and obviously a lot of laughter, more laughter than tears. But an artist has to be able to do both.
Bambi and 5 other movies came out, but by then they had so much competition that they didn't make any money. It wasn't till, what was the little elephant that flew? Dumbo.
Dumbo, yeah.
It was the first one to make money.
Yep.
All the rest of them lost money, and they were in a desperate position. They were thinking, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And Walt said, well, we're going to do Disneyland. His board of directors said, no, that's not what we do. We make movies. And they said, no, we're not doing Disneyland. They wouldn't give him a penny. And he says, well, then I'll start my own company and do it myself. And they said, okay. And he did. It worked. And then they ended up having to buy it back and pay him a whole bunch of extra money for it.
Well, talk about Black Sunday for a minute.
ABC was a fledgling TV station, and they needed something. So Walt went to them and said, if you'll help me fund Disneyland, I will give you some TV shows that really will be blockbusters. And so they came to an agreement. ABC owned a big part of Disneyland. They only had a year to build it. Now, can you imagine starting right now and a year from now building an entire amusement park? It wasn't a small one. It was Disneyland. In 1 year, it had to be built because the way the TV contracts read, they weren't finished. And what went wrong was this. Everything went wrong. The water fountains didn't work. The newly paved paths, it was hot that day, so women's high heel shoes got stuck in there. They had only printed 11,000 tickets. So people got the tickets and reprinted them. So they had 50,000 people there. More than half the rides didn't work. There was so much traffic outside that the people that were supposed to be on the TV shows like Art Link, they couldn't get in. So it was a fiasco, but you couldn't tell if you're watching it on TV, they were making it sound like everything was wonderful. But the people that were there, it wasn't wonderful. So the news got out, and the next day Disney got on the TV and said, oh, we had a few setbacks, but just give us a couple of weeks, we'll have it. And within the first year, they'd done $1 million worth of business. And in a few years later, they were doing 10 million. So it got off to a little bit of a rocky start, but it worked out for him.
He had an amazing life, amazing influence, and still such a relevant person, even though he's been dead. I'm trying to think when he died. It's got a good 40 years.
66.
1956?
Yes, 66. He died in 66.
66.
he had lung cancer. He had a cancer tumor the size of a walnut when they discovered it. And they told him he wasn't going to live but a couple more years. And so he started planning. Well, he only lived for 3 more months.
Mm.
And he was right in the middle of putting together a Disney World and Epcot. Epcot was going to be the city of the future. He had so many plans. The world would be different today had he lived.
Mm.
Tremendously different because of the things that he planned to put in Epcot, the city of the future. He wanted to design a city that other cities could use as a roadmap to design their cities to make them better.
Mm.
He got the property to do it, 40 square miles.
Even that property down in Florida, I mean, he had to be, you think of that area of Florida today, it's so developed, of course, but I was there 35, 40 years ago in that area, and it was a swamp, basically.
A swamp, yeah, the swamp.
Just to see once again, hey, this swamp could have hotels, restaurants, this huge theme park, etc. And just he was such a vision. He could see the future. The guy was a true visionary in everything that he did.
They were down searching and flying around, and they just searched and searched. They couldn't find any place. They knew they wanted Florida because they'd done the research. They believed Florida would be good. He had just gone to the World's Fair, and it was accepted in the East, all of his rides and things. So he knew it was going to work. And he was headed home and looking out the small plane, the prop plane, and he saw 2 major arteries intersecting, and there was just swamp as far as you could see. And he said, "That's it, that's it." So then he sent them down there undercover to purchase the property. So they were going to get 10,000 acres, but they were getting it so cheap that they didn't stop. They kept purchasing until finally one day he was having an interview, and one of the ladies that was interviewing him said, "Is that you purchasing the land?" And the look on his face, it caught him off guard, gave it away. Everybody knew then, because they formed a bunch of companies and went down and each of the company was purchasing the property. And it was just swampland. The people that owned it, they had a hard time finding them. Most of the land had been purchased 50 years earlier for $5. You could get like 2 or 3 acres in Florida for $5. It was a scam thing.
Yeah.
But they still owned the property, and they had to go hunt down those people after 50 years and convince them to sell the property, and then buy it for about $100 an acre. I think the total average of all the acres was $200 an acre.
Wow.
Not giving it away. But once everybody learned that it was Disney, the acreage went through the roof. But now it was $15,000 an acre or $50,000 an acre, but they already had 40,000 acres by then, which was more than enough.
Amazing. Well, Dennis, this has been fun. This has been a great chapter. We actually did get through it. It took us about an hour, not quite. Disney one of those, not just iconic brands, but iconic people. When you think about how far ahead of his time he was, and how many things as a result of his work beyond Disney, all the other things that have come along, the Lucases and all these other folks that have came along after him that have been so creative with Star Wars and all these other things that probably never would have happened if there hadn't been a Walt Disney. And
we've just skimmed over the story. There's so much more to the story. So be sure to get the book. I'm giving it away free. Go to realimpactbook.com, scroll down to the bottom, click on podcast attendee, and it's an automatic delivery. It sends you the download. You won't get it put on any email list unless you click, tell me when you write another book, then I'll tell you when I do. If you do and you want us to answer questions or whatever about it, just let John know. We'll get back with you. If you like it, or if you want to make a donation to get it to kids, go to realimpactbook.com and click on charity. We're giving it to disadvantaged communities, to children, to help them. And I would appreciate a review on Amazon if you have a chance to do that.
And next week, we're going to talk about the Andrews sisters.
Oh, boy.
That's going to be fun.
Yes, it is.
But we might as well announce this now too, because we're coming to the end of our series on Real Impact. The Andrews sisters will be the last chapter that we do on this particular book. Fortunately, Dennis has some more books coming, but we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. But we're going to have, Dennis, if it's okay with you, I'd like to have a live interview with you when we wrap up the Andrews sisters, once that airs, which will be, we're doing this once per week, that we're airing this on Wednesdays. But I'd like everybody to be able to talk to Dennis live. So we'll book that and we'll announce that once again in the group chat to let people know. And then we'll get together and you guys can ask Dennis whatever you want to ask him.
Enjoy that. That'd be lots of fun. And don't miss the Andrews sisters. That's one of my favorite. You think you don't know them, but you do. You've heard them so many times. I don't care how old you are. You can be 10 years old. You've heard the Andrews sisters because they did 90 million albums. And if you've lived through a Christmas in America, you've heard the Andrews sisters many times.
Yeah, it certainly has. So that's going to be fun. So that'll be next week, folks. Hang on. We got more to come. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check back weekly for more exciting episodes. And don't miss Ink and Insight every Wednesday, where we celebrate iconic authors and dive into their impactful works.